The Sleeping Beauty Paradox is a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of probability and belief, forcing us to reconsider how information shapes our perspective when key details are hidden. Though simple to describe, its implications reach deep into logic, reasoning, and our approach to uncertainty. The scenario involves Sleeping Beauty, who agrees to take part in an unusual experiment. On Sunday, she is put to sleep. A fair coin is then flipped to determine what happens next. If the coin lands on heads, she is woken up once on Monday and then put back to sleep until the experiment ends. If it lands on tails, she is woken up on Monday, put back to sleep, and woken up again on Tuesday before the experiment concludes. Crucially, after each awakening, her memory is erased, so she never knows whether it is Monday or Tuesday when she wakes up. At each awakening, she is asked, "What is the probability that the coin landed on heads?" This is where the paradox emerges. Intuitively, the coin flip is a fair 50-50 event, but because her memory resets, she cannot distinguish between different awakenings. This uncertainty complicates probability calculations, leading to two competing interpretations: the halfer and thirder positions. The halfer position argues that the probability remains 50%. The fairness of the coin does not change, and the experiment's structure does not provide new information about the outcome. Since the coin flip was an independent event, Sleeping Beauty should still assign a 50% probability to heads when she wakes up. The thirder position, however, takes a different approach. It considers the number of awakenings. If the coin lands on heads, she wakes up once. If it lands on tails, she wakes up twice. Since each waking moment is indistinguishable to her, and 2 out of the 3 possible awakenings correspond to tails, the probability of tails is 2-3, making the probability of heads 1-3. To clarify the thirder argument, imagine the problem split into 3 scenarios. The coin lands on heads, and it is Monday. The coin lands on tails, and it is Monday. The coin lands on tails, and it is Tuesday. When Sleeping Beauty wakes up, she knows she is in one of these 3 situations, but has no way of distinguishing between them. Since 2 out of the 3 cases involve the coin landing on tails, the probability of tails is 2-3. The halfer counterargument insists that this reasoning mistakenly shifts focus from the coin itself to the number of awakenings. They argue that the number of times Sleeping Beauty wakes up does not influence the coin's fairness, and that probability should be assigned based only on the original flip, keeping it at 50%. This debate reveals how probability can be difficult to interpret in cases where information is distorted or limited. Unlike typical probability problems with clear sequences of events, the Sleeping Beauty Paradox introduces memory erasure, complicating how we assess likelihoods. It forces us to consider whether probabilities are objective properties of events or shaped by an observer's available information. One way to relate this paradox to real life is through a lottery analogy. Suppose you have 2 tickets. One enters you into a single drawing, while the other enters you into 2 separate drawings. If you wake up after a drawing but don't know which ticket was used, your odds depend on whether you focus on the fairness of the lottery or the number of times you might have participated. This illustrates how a shift in perspective can change probability assessments. Beyond probability theory, the paradox also raises deeper philosophical questions. Each time Sleeping Beauty wakes up, she experiences a new moment of awareness, but lacks continuity in her memory. This touches on broader issues of consciousness and identity. What does it mean to be the same person across time when information is missing? Some argue that the paradox isn't a paradox at all, but simply a matter of correctly framing the question. Halfers and thirders may be answering different versions of the problem. Halfers focus on the probability of the coin flip itself. while thirders focus on the probability of waking up in a particular instance. Clarifying what is being asked might resolve the disagreement, but it does not diminish the paradox's value as a thought experiment. Ultimately, the Sleeping Beauty paradox forces us to question our assumptions about probability, belief, and knowledge. It reveals that even seemingly simple scenarios can hide complexities that reshape our reasoning. Whether you side with the halfer or thirder perspective, or find yourself somewhere in between, the paradox offers a profound lesson. Our understanding of reality is not just shaped by the facts we observe, but by how we interpret them. And, in a world filled with uncertainty, that is a lesson worth remembering. The lottery paradox is a fascinating problem in philosophy and logic that challenges our understanding of belief, probability, and rationality. It presents a seemingly simple, yet deeply paradoxical scenario. Imagine a lottery with millions of tickets. You know that only one ticket will win. Given the overwhelming odds against any particular ticket, it seems reasonable to believe that each individual ticket will lose. If there are 1 million tickets, each has a 99.99999% chance of losing. Based on this, you might conclude that any ticket you examine is not the winner. However, you also know that one ticket must win. This creates a contradiction in your beliefs. How can you rationally believe that every ticket will lose while also believing that one ticket will certainly win? The paradox forces us to confront how we form and manage beliefs when dealing with uncertainty. At first glance, it seems logical to assume that each ticket will lose because the probability of anyone winning is incredibly low. Yet, applying this reasoning to every ticket leads to the conclusion that all tickets will lose, which contradicts the undeniable fact that there is a guaranteed winner. The paradox arises because our individual beliefs about each ticket, when combined, conflict with our overall belief about the lottery's outcome. This problem also raises questions about the nature of belief itself. Normally, when we say we believe something, we mean that we accept it as true, or at least highly likely. But beliefs exist on a spectrum of certainty. For instance, you might believe it will rain because the sky is cloudy, but you wouldn't be absolutely certain. The lottery paradox challenges us to consider how confident we must be before claiming to believe something. If the odds of any one ticket winning are minuscule, is it rational to believe it won't win? Or does even the slightest possibility mean such a belief is unjustified? Philosophers have proposed various solutions to this paradox, but none are without difficulties. One approach suggests that belief should be tied to probability thresholds. For example, you might decide that a belief is justified if the probability of it being true is at least 95%. Since each ticket has an extremely high probability of losing, it would be rational to believe that any given ticket will not win. However, this doesn't fully resolve the paradox because while it may be rational to believe that each ticket will lose, believing that all tickets will lose remains irrational, as you still know that one must win. Another perspective involves distinguishing between beliefs about individual events and beliefs about an entire system. You might rationally believe that any particular ticket will lose when considering it in isolation. But when you step back and view the lottery as a whole, you must acknowledge that at least one ticket will win. This suggests that the paradox emerges from applying the same reasoning to both individual tickets and the entire lottery, even though they require different kinds of logic. In other words, what is reasonable for a single ticket does not necessarily apply to the entire set. Beyond logic and probability, the paradox also raises broader philosophical questions about how we handle conflicting beliefs. In daily life, people often hold beliefs that seem to contradict each other. For instance, you may trust a friend but still doubt their ability to fulfill a particular promise. These beliefs do not necessarily cancel each other out, but they do create a kind of internal tension. The lottery paradox highlights this same tension, demonstrating how perfectly rational thought can still lead to apparent contradictions. It challenges us to consider whether our belief systems must always be entirely consistent, or whether some degree of contradiction is inevitable and even rational in certain contexts. The implications of this paradox extend far beyond lotteries. In scientific research, for example, we often accept general principles while acknowledging exceptions that appear contradictory. The paradox also mirrors real-world decision-making, where probabilities guide our beliefs, but do not always align neatly with certainty. Ultimately, the lottery paradox forces us to rethink the relationship between probability and belief, questioning how we reconcile rationality with uncertainty. In everyday life, we constantly navigate probabilities and uncertainties. A scientist, for example, might believe that a new drug is likely to fail in clinical trials based on prior data. Yet, at the same time, they might also believe there is a chance it could succeed and revolutionize medicine. These beliefs may appear contradictory, but they reflect the reality of working within uncertainty. The lottery paradox serves as a navigating the paradoxes of belief with greater confidence and understanding reveals yet another dilemma, the altruist dilemma, a paradox that emerges when someone acts with genuine selflessness, yet finds their intentions questioned, misinterpreted, or even counterproductive. At its core, altruism is the desire to help others without expecting anything in return, an ideal long admired by humanity. However, it is far from simple. Doubts often arise. Can anyone truly act without self-interest? And even if they can, does altruism always lead to the best outcome? These questions form the heart of the dilemma. Consider someone who dedicates their life to charity, tirelessly working to improve the lives of others. From an outside perspective, their actions may appear entirely noble, yet skepticism persists. Are they driven by genuine care, or is there an underlying desire for recognition, social status, or self-validation? This doubt creates a challenge for the altruist. If their actions are perceived as self-serving, even indirectly, does that perception diminish the value of their contributions? And if their efforts are misunderstood or unappreciated, how does that affect their motivation to continue helping? Another layer of the dilemma emerges when altruistic actions lead to unintended consequences. Offering aid to struggling communities may seem unquestionably beneficial, yet in some cases, it fosters dependency, disrupts local economies, or even exacerbates existing problems. This raises a critical question. Is the act of giving enough, or should the actual outcomes of that giving take precedence? The altruist must contend with the reality that doing good is not always as straightforward as it appears. The concept of sacrifice further complicates this dynamic. Altruism often requires giving up something, time, money, energy, or personal opportunities for the benefit of others. While such selflessness is commendable, it can also lead to personal strain. Someone who consistently prioritizes others over themselves may eventually experience burnout, diminishing their capacity to continue helping. This creates a difficult balance. How much should be sacrificed for the sake of others before it begins to cause harm to oneself? At what point does selflessness become unsustainable? Evolutionary biology provides one way to explore this paradox. Altruism is not exclusive to humans. It is observed in many animal species. For example, some birds emit warning calls to alert others of predators, risking their own safety to protect the group. This behavior appears counterintuitive to survival, but ultimately benefits the species as a whole. In humans, the evolution of altruism is even more intricate. Acts of kindness foster trust and cooperation, essential for social stability. However, this leads back to the question of motivation. Do people act altruistically because it benefits the group and, by extension, themselves? Or is there a deeper, more selfless drive at play? Philosophers have long debated whether true altruism exists. Psychological egoism posits that all human actions, even those that appear selfless, are ultimately driven by self-interest. Consider a simple example. A person sees someone struggling with their groceries and offers to help. On the surface, this act appears purely selfless. However, upon deeper examination, questions arise. Did they help because they genuinely cared, or because they wanted to feel good about themselves? Does it matter why they helped, as long as the outcome was positive? The dilemma invites reflection on such questions without providing easy answers. The issue of scale further complicates matters. Helping a single individual in a direct, tangible way often feels rewarding. However, when faced with large-scale crises, poverty, climate change, systemic inequality, altruistic efforts can feel insignificant or overwhelming. This sometimes leads to what is known as compassion fatigue, where the sheer scale of suffering makes individuals feel powerless. For the altruist, this can be deeply discouraging, leading to self-doubt about whether their contributions are making any meaningful impact or even addressing the right problems. To make matters even more challenging, altruism is not always met with appreciation. A well-intended act of generosity may be perceived as intrusive, patronizing, or even harmful. Providing aid to a struggling community, for instance, might unintentionally undermine local leadership or reinforce harmful dependencies. These unintended consequences highlight the importance of not just acting with good intentions, but also considering the broader impact of those actions. Another dimension of the altruist's dilemma is the tension between individual and collective responsibility. When one person takes it upon themselves to help others, it may inadvertently absolve others from feeling the need to contribute. Someone who donates generously to a cause, for instance, might feel they have fulfilled their moral obligation, even when the problem requires systemic solutions rather than individual acts of charity. This creates a moral hazard in which altruistic individuals shoulder the burden of addressing societal issues that demand collective action. This dilemma also raises questions about fairness. Should some individuals be expected to give more than others? Should altruism be regarded as a moral obligation, or should it remain a voluntary choice? If one person consistently sacrifices their resources to help others, while another does little to contribute, does that make the first person morally superior, or are they simply making a personal choice that aligns with their values? These questions highlight the intricate relationship between personal ethics and societal norms. Despite its complexities, altruism remains a fundamental part of the human experience. It inspires acts of kindness, fosters community, and serves as a reminder of shared humanity. The altruist's dilemma does not diminish the importance of selflessness, but rather urges a more thoughtful approach to it. By reflecting on motivations, consequences, and limits, the Banach-Tarski paradox is one of the most counterintuitive and mind-bending concepts in mathematics. At its core, it asserts something that seems utterly impossible. You can take a solid sphere, break it into a finite number of pieces, and then rearrange those pieces to form two identical spheres, each the same size as the original. This idea doesn't just challenge common sense, it completely defies our everyday understanding of geometry, matter, and logic. Yet, despite its strangeness, it is a rigorously proven result rooted in the principles of set theory and mathematical abstraction. To grasp the Banach-Tarski paradox, it is essential to recognize that it does not apply to physical objects like a real ball you can hold. Instead, it exists entirely within the realm of mathematics, where space and division obey different rules than those of the physical world. In mathematics, objects can be infinitely divisible, and concepts like volume and shape behave in ways that defy intuition. The paradox arises not from practical reality, but from the unique properties of infinity and the way space can be manipulated under mathematical principles. Imagine a perfect mathematical sphere, not one composed of atoms, but a collection of points in three-dimensional space arranged to form a sphere. The Banach-Tarski theorem states that this sphere can be divided into 5 specific parts through a highly abstract process. However, these parts are not simple slices or chunks. Rather, they are intricately scattered sets of points so complex that they are impossible to visualize. Each piece is described as non-measurable, meaning it lacks a well-defined volume in the conventional sense. Once the sphere is split into these non-measurable pieces, something remarkable occurs. By applying rigid motions, rotations, and translations, the pieces can be rearranged to form 2 complete spheres, each identical in size to the original. No volume is added or removed, yet somehow, what was once a single sphere becomes 2. This seemingly paradoxical result is not magic, but a consequence of how infinite sets behave under specific mathematical rules. The key to understanding this paradox lies in the mathematical framework that enables it. The Banach-Tarski paradox relies heavily on the axiom of choice, a foundational principle in set theory. This axiom states that given any collection of sets, no matter how abstract or infinite, one can always choose an element from each set, even if there is no explicit rule governing the selection. While essential for many areas of mathematics, the axiom of choice also leads to deeply unintuitive results, such as the Banach-Tarski paradox. By invoking the axiom of choice, mathematicians can construct the non-measurable sets that make the paradox possible. Unlike ordinary geometric shapes, these sets do not obey the usual rules of volume. They are assembled through an infinite number of selections, rather than a straightforward, step-by-step process. Consequently, when the sphere is divided into these pieces, its volume is not truly lost. Instead, it is redistributed in a way that defies conventional measurement. To make sense of this, consider how infinity behaves differently from finite quantities. In the real world, if you cut a loaf of bread into pieces and attempt to rearrange them into 2 identical loaves, you will always fall short. But in mathematics, infinity does not behave like finite numbers. Infinite sets can be divided and reassembled in ways that preserve their size, even if the process appears nonsensical. For instance, the set of all positive integers 1, 2, 3, 4 can be paired 1-to-1 with the set of even integers 2, 4, 6, 8, despite the latter seeming only half as large. This strange property of infinite sets underlies the logic of the Banach-Tarski paradox. Another way to approach the paradox is by considering the nature of the pieces themselves. In everyday life, when we divide an object, each part retains a recognizable structure and measurable size. However, in the Banach-Tarski paradox, the pieces are so fragmented and scattered across space that they no longer have these properties. The points that originally formed a sphere are redistributed in such a way that traditional notions of volume cease to apply. These pieces exist mathematically, but they have no physical counterpart. This is why the Banach-Tarski paradox is purely a mathematical result. It cannot be replicated in the physical world. Real objects are composed of atoms, which are discrete, and indivisible beyond a certain point. You cannot divide an atom into an infinite number of points, or manipulate matter with the precision required to create non-measurable sets. Furthermore, real-world physics imposes constraints, such as the conservation of mass and energy, that prevent such a transformation from occurring. These constraints do not exist in the abstract mathematical universe where the Banach-Tarski theorem operates. Despite its abstract nature, the Banach-Tarski paradox has profound implications for how we think about mathematics, infinity, and even the nature of reality itself. It demonstrates that our intuitive understanding of space and geometry breaks down when we extend our thinking beyond the finite and into the infinite. It also underscores both the power and the peculiar consequences of the axiom of choice. While this principle is essential for many mathematical proofs, it also produces results that challenge our deepest intuitions about logic and possibility. Since its introduction in 1924 by mathematicians Stefan Banach and Alfred Tarski, the paradox has sparked intense debate among mathematicians and philosophers alike. Some view it as a fascinating illustration of how abstract mathematics can lead to unintuitive truths, while others question whether the axiom of choice should be accepted at all. The drinker paradox is a fascinating logical statement that appears counterintuitive at first, but is entirely valid upon closer examination. It is one of those mind-bending concepts that challenge our intuition, making us pause and wonder how something so seemingly absurd can actually hold true. The paradox states, in any bar, there is at least one person, such that if that person is drinking, then everyone in the bar is drinking. At first glance, this assertion appears nonsensical. How could the drinking status of a single individual dictate the drinking behavior of an entire group? However, a deeper dive into formal logic reveals that the statement is, in fact, always true. The paradox is grounded in predicate logic, a branch of formal logic that deals with the structure of statements rather than their intuitive meaning. It does not suggest that one person has any control over the actions of others, nor does it imply any mysterious influence at play. Instead, the statement is an observation about the logical relationship between if and then conditions. The key to understanding the paradox is recognizing that its truth is guaranteed regardless of the number of people in the bar or their actual drinking status. To break this down, consider two possible scenarios. Either everyone in the bar is drinking, or at least one person is not drinking. If the first scenario is true, meaning everyone is drinking, then the statement is trivially valid. You could select any individual in the bar, and the condition if that person is drinking, then everyone is drinking would naturally hold. However, the second scenario is where things become more intriguing. If not everyone is drinking, then there must be at least one person who is sober. Let's call this person Alex. Now, let's reconsider the paradox in light of Alex's presence. The statement asserts that there exists a person such that if that person is drinking, then everyone is drinking. Since Alex is not drinking, the condition if Alex is drinking is never triggered. In formal logic, when the premise of an if-then statement is false, the entire statement is automatically considered true, regardless of the conclusion. This principle, known as vacuous truth, is counterintuitive, but fundamental to logical reasoning. In simple terms, because Alex is not drinking, the conditional statement doesn't require verification. It holds true by default. To illustrate this with an example, suppose a bar has 3 patrons, Alex, Ben, and Chris. If Alex is not drinking, the condition if Alex is drinking, then everyone is drinking is automatically true. Now, if Ben and Chris are drinking, then selecting either of them as the key individual in the paradox also satisfies the statement. Regardless of the drinking distribution, there will always be someone in the group for whom the logical structure of the statement holds. What makes the drinker paradox so intriguing is that it highlights how formal logic can lead to conclusions that seem at odds with common sense. In everyday reasoning, we tend to associate if-then statements with causality. If one event occurs, it causes another to happen. However, in formal logic, if-then statements are concerned with truth values rather than causal relationships. This distinction allows statements like the drinker paradox to be true even when they seem to contradict our intuitive understanding of cause and effect. A central idea underlying the paradox is the concept of vacuous truth. This principle states that a conditional statement is true whenever its premise is false, regardless of the conclusion. Consider the statement, "If I am the king of Mars, then pigs can fly." Since the premise, "I am the king of Mars," is false, the entire statement is considered true no matter how absurd the conclusion, "pigs can fly," may be. This might feel unintuitive, but it is a standard convention in formal logic and plays a crucial role in making the drinker paradox valid. Another fascinating aspect of the paradox is its universal applicability. It holds true for any number of people in a bar, whether there are 3 patrons or 1,000. The reasoning does not change with the size of the group, demonstrating the robustness of formal logic in capturing abstract truths that are independent of specific circumstances. At the same time, the paradox serves as a reminder of the limitations of logic in describing real-world behavior. While it is a mathematically valid statement, it does not offer any practical insight into how people behave in social settings. No bartender would rely on this reasoning to determine who is drinking in their establishment. Instead, its value lies in how it challenges our perceptions of truth and forces us to think more carefully about the structure of logical statements. Beyond its immediate implications, the drinker paradox connects to broader discussions in philosophy and mathematics. It is closely related to fundamental logical principles such as the law of excluded middle, which states that every statement is either true or false, with no middle ground. By exploring paradoxes like this, philosophers and mathematicians refine their understanding of logic's foundations and uncover new ways to approach abstract reasoning. Ultimately, the drinker paradox is a thought-provoking example of how logic can lead to conclusions that defy our expectations. It reminds us that truth can take forms that seem strange or counterintuitive at first, but are perfectly valid within a formal framework. Engaging with such paradoxes expands our understanding of logic and deepens our appreciation for the beauty and power of abstract reasoning. Even if it has no direct real-world application, the paradox offers a glimpse into the surprising ways in which logic can illuminate the mysteries of the universe. Zeno's arrow paradox is one of the most thought-provoking challenges to our understanding of motion, time, and reality. At first glance, it appears deceptively simple, even trivial. But as we examine it more closely, its apparent clarity dissolves into something far more perplexing. Zeno introduced this paradox as part of a broader argument questioning whether motion and change truly exist as we perceive them. By focusing on the flight of an arrow, he compels us to reconsider the fundamental nature of movement and the passage of time. Imagine an arrow in flight. It has been released from a bow and is traveling toward a target. To any observer, the motion seems obvious. The arrow begins at one location and progresses smoothly through the air until it reaches another. This is an ordinary, everyday experience, but Zeno urges us to slow down and analyze what is happening at any given instant. If we freeze time at any single moment during the arrow's flight, where is the arrow? At that precise instant, the arrow occupies a specific position in space. It does not appear to be moving. If this holds true for every single moment that we observe, then how can the arrow be said to move at all? This question strikes at the heart of how we define motion. Movement, in its most basic sense, involves an object changing position over time. But what happens when we divide time into smaller and smaller increments? At any single point in those intervals, the arrow must be somewhere specific. If we claim that, in each frozen moment, the arrow does not change its position, then it is stationary at every instant of observation. Yet, if it is always stationary in every individual moment, how can these stationary moments combine to produce motion? This reasoning feels counterintuitive because we clearly perceive the arrow moving. We can watch it traverse the sky and hit its target. But Zeno's paradox is not concerned with what we perceive. It challenges what happens when we attempt to describe motion through logic and reasoning. If time consists of an infinite series of individual moments, and the arrow remains still in each of them, then movement appears to be an illusion. But if time is not composed of discrete moments, then what exactly is it? Zeno's paradox does not merely challenge motion, it calls into question the very nature of time itself. Consider an analogy, a film reel. A movie is composed of individual frames, each showing a single frozen image. When played rapidly, these still images create the illusion of continuous movement. If you were to stop on a single frame, the picture would be motionless, much like Zeno's arrow. If motion in film is simply an illusion generated by the rapid succession of frames, could it be that time functions in the same way? Are we merely perceiving continuity where none truly exists? This paradox was part of a larger argument that Zeno developed in support of his teacher Parmenides. Parmenides maintained that change and motion were illusions, and that reality was fundamentally unchanging and indivisible. The arrow paradox, along with Zeno's other paradoxes, sought to demonstrate that our conventional understanding of motion leads to contradictions. If we accept that the arrow is motionless at every instant, yet still see it moving, then our perception might not reflect the true nature of reality. To grapple with this paradox, we must examine how thinkers throughout history have attempted to resolve it. One key approach involves redefining time and motion. In modern science, time is often treated as a continuous flow, rather than a series of discrete frozen instants. Motion, under this view, centuries after Zeno, the development of calculus provided a mathematical framework that sidesteps the paradox. Calculus allows us to describe motion using infinitesimally small increments, defining an object's velocity at any given point without needing to stop time. Instead of focusing on the arrow's position at a single instant, we analyze how its position shifts over an arbitrarily small span of time. Velocity, as a rate of change, bridges the gap between position and time, resolving Zeno's apparent contradiction. Zeno's paradox assumes that time is composed of static moments, but calculus demonstrates that motion can be expressed in terms of continuous change. However, even with modern mathematics, the paradox raises deeper questions about the fundamental nature of time. Is time truly continuous, flowing seamlessly like a river? Or is it composed of discrete units, like the frames of a film? If it is continuous, how do we make sense of dividing it into infinitely smaller segments? If it is discrete, how can motion occur without abrupt jumps from one point to another? Some philosophers and physicists argue that the paradox hints at profound truths about the structure of reality. In quantum mechanics, for example, particles can exist in multiple states at once, or appear to move and remain stationary simultaneously. These strange quantum behaviors resonate with Zeno's insights, suggesting that our everyday understanding of motion and time may not fully capture the deeper complexities of the universe. Others contend that Zeno's paradoxes do not prove that motion is impossible, but rather expose the limitations of our reasoning. When we attempt to divide time or movement into infinitely small parts, we encounter conceptual difficulties because our logic struggles to handle the nature of infinity. The paradox compels us to reconsider how we approach such problems, challenging us to refine our understanding of fundamental concepts. Ultimately, Zeno's arrow paradox is far more than a puzzle about an arrow. It is a profound inquiry into the nature of existence itself. It forces us to rethink our assumptions about motion, time, and perception. It reminds us that even the most familiar aspects of reality can conceal deep philosophical mysteries. When we observe an arrow soaring through the air, we rarely question whether motion is real or merely an illusion. But Zeno's paradox urges us to pause. A greedy algorithm is a problem-solving approach that makes the best immediate choice at each step, hoping that these local decisions will lead to a globally optimal solution. It is simple, intuitive, and often highly effective. However, there is an inherent paradox in greedy algorithms. They are both powerful and limited. While they can efficiently solve many problems, they can also lead to solutions that are far from the best possible. This paradox arises because what seems optimal in the moment does not always translate into the best outcome in the long run. Imagine trying to climb a mountain in dense fog. You can only see a few steps ahead, so you always take the steepest, upward path, assuming it will get you to the summit the fastest. Initially, this strategy works well. Each step brings you higher, and progress feels steady. But at some point, you may find yourself stuck on a smaller peak, unable to see the higher mountain just beyond the mist. By focusing only on the immediate gain, always choosing the steepest incline, you might miss the true summit entirely. This is the essence of the greedy algorithm paradox. Short-term optimization does not always lead to long-term success. A classic example of this paradox is the coin change problem. Suppose you need to make change for a specific amount using coins of different denominations. If you have coins worth 1, 3, and 4 units, a greedy approach would always pick the largest available coin first. To make 6 units, you would select a 4-unit coin, leaving 2 units to be covered by 2 1-unit coins. In total, you use 3 coins. However, a better solution exists. Choosing 2 3-unit coins instead requires only 2 coins. The greedy algorithm fails because it does not consider the long-term implications of its immediate choices. The paradox is even more striking because greedy algorithms work perfectly in some cases, while failing in others. If the available denominations were 1, 5, and 10 units, the greedy algorithm would always yield the optimal solution. To make change for 18 units, it would pick a 10-unit coin, a 5-unit coin, and 3 1-unit coins, resulting in the fewest coins possible. The reason for this difference lies in the structure of the problem. When the denominations are aligned in a way that allows incremental accumulation, the greedy approach works flawlessly. But when the structure is more complex, as in the earlier example, the algorithm struggles. In real-world applications, this paradox has significant implications. Greedy algorithms are widely used in scheduling tasks, routing network traffic, and compressing data. To make this clearer, imagine a treasure hunting expedition across a series of islands. Each island contains a certain amount of treasure, and you have a limited time to collect as much as possible. A greedy strategy would always prioritize visiting the island with the largest amount of treasure next. While this seems like the best approach, it may leave you stranded far from islands that, collectively, could have provided even more treasure. Here, the greedy algorithm's focus on immediate rewards blinds it to better solutions. Yet, there are notable cases where greedy algorithms work flawlessly. One example is Kruskal's algorithm for finding a minimum spanning tree in a network. This algorithm aims to connect all nodes using the smallest possible total connection cost. It works by always selecting the shortest available connection that does not create a cycle. Surprisingly, this greedy method guarantees the optimal solution. Another example is Huffman coding, a technique used in data compression. The goal is to assign shorter codes to more frequently occurring elements, minimizing the total length of the encoded data. The greedy approach builds the code step by step, always combining the two least frequent elements at each stage. This method produces the optimal solution, showing that greedy algorithms can be remarkably effective in the right context. So why do greedy algorithms sometimes fail? Their primary weakness is short-sightedness. By focusing only on the best choice at each step, they ignore the bigger picture. This limitation is acceptable when the problem structure ensures that local decisions lead to global optimization, as in Kruskal's algorithm. But in problems like the traveling salesman or the coin change example, the lack of foresight results in suboptimal outcomes. The greedy algorithm paradox highlights the importance of understanding the problem at hand. In some cases, a greedy approach is not just sufficient, it is the best possible strategy. In others, it leads to failure. Recognizing the difference is crucial. When the stakes are high, relying solely on a greedy algorithm can be risky. Alternative strategies, such as dynamic programming or backtracking, take a more comprehensive view of the problem and often lead to better results. Beyond computer science, this paradox offers a broader lesson about decision-making in life. Just as an algorithm that prioritizes immediate rewards can result in poor long-term outcomes, so too can short-term thinking in everyday decisions. Whether managing resources, planning a project, or navigating personal challenges, it is worth asking, am I making the best choice for the moment, or the best choice overall? Greedy algorithms provide speed and simplicity, but they are not always the best guide. The falling elevator paradox is a thought experiment that delves into what would happen to a person inside an elevator if it were to fall freely under the force of gravity. At first glance, the answer seems straightforward. The person and the elevator would fall together, accelerating at the same rate due to gravity. However, a deeper examination of the scenario reveals complexities that challenge our understanding of forces, inertia, and perception. To grasp the paradox, imagine standing inside an elevator under normal conditions. When the elevator is stationary or moving smoothly, you feel the floor pressing up against your feet, counteracting the downward force of gravity and keeping you in place. Now, suppose the elevator's cable suddenly snaps. With nothing holding it up, the elevator begins to fall freely, accelerating downward due to gravity. This is where the paradox emerges. Because both you and the elevator are in free fall, you are accelerating at the same rate. From your perspective, it would feel as though gravity had disappeared. The floor beneath you is no longer exerting an upward force because it is falling away at the same speed as you are. This state, known as weightlessness, is similar to what astronauts experience in microgravity, where they float freely inside their spacecraft. The forces acting on you and the elevator are perfectly matched, creating an environment where you feel no weight. Yet the paradox extends beyond the sensation of weightlessness. It also raises questions about survival and impact. A common misconception is that jumping just before the elevator hits the ground might reduce the severity of the collision. The idea is that by jumping, a person could counteract some of the downward motion, decreasing their impact force. However, physics tells a different story. As the elevator falls, it accelerates downward at approximately 9.8 meters per second squared. The acceleration due to gravity, since you are falling along with it, any jump you make would provide only a small increase in upward velocity, perhaps around 3 meters per second for a strong jump. If the elevator is falling at 50 meters per second by the time it reaches the ground, your jump would only reduce your impact velocity to 47 meters per second, far from sufficient to prevent a catastrophic collision. The forces at play are simply too great for human strength to meaningfully counteract them. Air resistance adds another layer to the paradox. In a vacuum, the elevator and everything inside it would fall with no resistance, resulting in pure free fall. However, in reality, air resistance exerts an opposing force as the elevator accelerates downward. Over time, this force can reach a point where it balances the downward pull of gravity, leading to what is known as terminal velocity, a maximum falling speed beyond which further acceleration ceases. While terminal velocity might reduce the elevator's final speed somewhat, it would still be too high for survival. Modern elevators are equipped with safety mechanisms to prevent free fall. Emergency brakes engage if the cable snaps. The falling elevator paradox provides a fascinating lens through which to examine key physics concepts, including inertia and relative motion. Inertia, a principle described by Isaac Newton, states that an object resists changes to its motion unless acted upon by an external force. In this scenario, both you and the elevator share the same motion, which is why no force is felt inside. Relative motion also plays a crucial role. From an external observer's perspective, both the elevator and its occupant are accelerating toward the ground. However, from the perspective of someone inside the elevator, it appears as though they are simply floating in place. This illustrates the fundamental principle that motion is always relative to a given frame of reference. Ultimately, the falling elevator paradox challenges our everyday intuitions about motion, gravity, and survival in extreme conditions. It highlights the limitations of human perception when confronted with physical laws that govern our world. While most people will never experience such a scenario firsthand, understanding the principles behind it deepens our appreciation for physics and the ways in which it shapes our reality. The thought experiment serves as a reminder that our intuitive grasp of motion and forces does not always align with the complexities of the universe. The Abilene Paradox describes a situation in which a group collectively agrees on a course of action that none of its members truly support or desire. This paradox arises from a breakdown in communication, where individuals go along with a decision based on the false assumption that others are in favor of it. Often, this occurs because people wish to avoid conflict, maintain harmony, or conform to perceived expectations, leading to outcomes that no one genuinely intended or wanted. It is a phenomenon frequently observed in organizations, families, and friendships, demonstrating how assumptions and a lack of honest dialogue can drive collective decisions in unintended directions. To illustrate the Abilene Paradox, imagine a family comfortably spending a hot summer day at home. Someone casually suggests driving to a diner in a nearby town, Abilene, for lunch. Although no one is particularly enthusiastic about the idea, each family member agrees, assuming that everyone else wants to go. They endure a long, uncomfortable drive in the sweltering heat, only to arrive at a diner where the food is mediocre and the experience underwhelming. On the way back, someone admits they never really wanted to go, only to discover that no one else did either. The entire outing happened not because anyone truly desired it, but because each person mistakenly believed they were accommodating the preferences of the group. This is the essence of the Abilene Paradox, people acting against their own wishes, not due to direct opposition, but because of an absence of clear communication. In this case, Each family member feared disrupting the group dynamic, disappointing others, or seeming unsupportive. Rather than express their true thoughts, they conformed, resulting in a collective decision that no one genuinely favored. Paradox is particularly common in workplace settings, where employees may hesitate to voice concerns about a proposal. A team might approve an idea, not because they truly support it, but because each member assumes others do. Fear of being perceived as negative, uncooperative, or out of sync leads to silence, allowing flawed decisions to move forward unchecked. Over time, this lack of honest discussion can create frustration, resentment, and even failure, as choices are made based on misinterpretations rather than genuine agreement. One of the main forces driving the Abilene Paradox is the human tendency to avoid conflict. Many people find disagreement uncomfortable, especially in group settings where relationships and reputations are at stake. They may worry that expressing a differing opinion could lead to tension, alienation, or criticism. Ironically, by avoiding open conflict, they create an unspoken form of dissatisfaction that can be even more damaging to relationships and group cohesion. Another key factor is the assumption that others have stronger preferences than we do. In the Abilene example, each family member likely thought, "I don't really want to go, but everyone else seems to, so I'll agree." This assumption quickly multiplies, with each individual silently deferring to the perceived wishes of the group. Without explicit discussion, the group ends up making a decision based on an illusion of consensus, rather than actual agreement. The Abilene Paradox also highlights challenges in self-awareness and communication. People do not always recognize their own preferences clearly or feel confident enough to articulate them. In group settings, uncertainty about one's own stance or the validity of one's perspective can lead to silence. This silence then creates a void that others fill with assumptions, reinforcing the cycle of miscommunication and conformity. Overcoming the Abilene Paradox requires fostering an environment where people feel safe expressing their genuine thoughts. Open communication and trust are essential in breaking the cycle of assumption-driven decision-making. For instance, a leader facilitating a team discussion might explicitly encourage dissenting opinions by saying, "I want to hear if anyone has concerns or sees this differently." When disagreement is normalized and valued, individuals are more likely to voice their true perspectives without fear of judgment. Asking direct, clarifying questions can also help disrupt the spiral of assumptions. In the family scenario, a simple question like, "Does anyone actually want to go to Abilene, or are we all just going along with it?" could have surfaced the hidden reluctance and prevented an unnecessary trip. In workplace settings, using tools like anonymous feedback or rating scales can reveal the true level of support for a decision, making it less likely that the group will commit to an unwanted course of action. Another effective strategy is fostering a culture of accountability. When individuals feel personally responsible for the outcomes of decisions, they are more inclined to speak up rather than passively conform. For example, if a team member knows their silence could contribute to a poor decision, they may be more motivated to express their concerns. Shifting the focus from group conformity to individual contribution helps ensure that decisions are based on genuine input rather than perceived expectations. At its core, the Abilene Paradox reflects the tension between individual and group dynamics. It reveals how easily people can fall into patterns of compliance, even when doing so contradicts their own interests. By recognizing these patterns, we can take conscious steps to prevent them from shaping our decisions. This requires cultivating self-awareness, encouraging honest communication, and challenging unspoken assumptions. Beyond group decision-making, the lessons of the Abilene Paradox extend into personal life. It prompts us to reflect on our own behaviors, how, often do we agree to things we do not truly want simply to avoid discomfort or conflict? How often do we assume we know what others want without actually asking them? By questioning these tendencies, we can make more intentional choices and build stronger, more transparent relationships. Ultimately, the Abilene Paradox underscores the importance of authenticity. Honest communication is the foundation of meaningful collaboration and connection. Expressing our true thoughts and listening openly to others creates the conditions for real consensus and shared purpose. The goal is not to avoid conflict altogether, but to engage with it productively, recognizing that healthy disagreement is a vital part of making informed, thoughtful decisions. By embracing these principles, we can move beyond the paradox and ensure that our choices align with our genuine values and priorities. The Traveler's Paradox is one of those intriguing ideas that captivates the imagination while challenging our understanding of time, reality, and logic. At its core, it presents a contradiction. How can someone alter the past if their actions in the past directly influence their ability to travel there in the first place? This paradox, often referred to as the Grandfather Paradox, has been extensively explored in science fiction, philosophy, and even physics. It raises fundamental questions about the nature of time and whether the past is something that can ever truly be changed. To grasp the essence of the Traveler's Paradox, imagine someone invents a time machine and journeys into the past. Suppose they travel to the early 20th century and make a critical decision to prevent the very invention of the time machine. If they succeed, they erase the possibility of time travel ever occurring, which means the machine they used to travel back in time would never have existed. But if the time machine was never created, how could they have traveled to the past in the first place? And if they never traveled to the past, how could they have prevented the machine's invention? This results in an endless logical loop that seems impossible to resolve. The paradox forces us to rethink the concept of cause and effect, which in our everyday experience follows a linear order. Causes always precede their effects. A glass falls and then shatters. It does not shatter first and then fall. This progression feels natural because it aligns with how we experience time. However, the Traveler's Paradox suggests a scenario where cause and effect interfere with each other, creating a self-contradictory loop. It also raises the question of whether time is fixed or malleable. If time is rigid, then the past, present, and future are predetermined, and no matter what actions a time traveler takes, they cannot truly change what has already happened. Under this view, the paradox is avoided because the traveler's actions would always align with the established timeline. Their presence in the past might be significant, but it would never fundamentally alter history. Conversely, if time is flexible and the past can be changed, the paradox becomes unavoidable. Any modification to past events could ripple through history and alter the present and future in unpredictable ways. Imagine a traveler preventing a major war. Upon returning to their own time, they might find a completely different world, one in which they never had a reason to travel back in time to stop the war in the first place. The moment they change history, they remove the very motivation that led to their journey, creating a self-defeating loop. Some theories attempt to resolve the paradox by proposing that changes to the past create alternate timelines or parallel universes. In this interpretation, any alteration splits the timeline in two, one where history follows its original course, and another where the traveler's actions have reshaped events. For example, if the traveler prevents the time machine's invention, they may return to a reality where time travel was never discovered, but the original timeline in which they embarked on their journey still exists separately. This model eliminates contradictions by allowing both realities to coexist. Another possible resolution is the principle of self-consistency, which suggests that even if one travels back in time, their actions must align with the events that have already occurred. Under this view, any attempt to alter history is doomed to fail in a way that ensures the timeline remains intact. For instance, if a traveler tries to warn a scientist about a disaster, their warning might be the very reason the scientist takes precautions, inadvertently setting events in motion exactly as history recorded them. This creates a self-contained loop where the past cannot be changed but can include the traveler's influence as part of its structure. The traveler's paradox is not just a theoretical puzzle. It has profound implications for our understanding of time itself. In physics, the laws of nature do not explicitly prohibit time travel. Einstein's theory of relativity allows for the possibility of closed time-like curves, paths in space-time that loop back on themselves. While this does not confirm that time travel is feasible, it suggests that the universe may not fundamentally forbid it. However, even if time travel is possible, the paradox indicates that some natural mechanism might prevent logical contradictions. This idea has led to speculation about a hypothetical principle known as chronological protection, which would either prevent time travel entirely or impose constraints to ensure the consistency of the timeline. In popular culture, the traveler's paradox has been explored in countless ways, often serving as a central narrative device that creates dramatic tension. From classic films like Back to the Future to more intricate stories such as Interstellar, the paradox provides a compelling framework for exploring ideas about destiny, free will, and the nature of reality. Yet, while the paradox is deeply thought-provoking, it is also rooted in our current understanding of time and causality. If our perception of time evolves, the paradox itself may dissolve. Some theories suggest that time is not a linear sequence, but rather an interconnected web where past, present, and future all influence one another simultaneously. In such a framework, altering the past may not be possible because time does not function as a one-directional flow. Instead, every moment could exist in relation to all others in ways we do not yet fully understand. The traveler's paradox compels us to question the limits of our intuition and the very nature of reality. Whether time travel ever becomes possible or remains purely theoretical, the paradox will continue to challenge and inspire new ways of thinking. Ultimately, solving the paradox may not be as important. Procrastination is a behavior nearly everyone experiences at some point, yet it remains one of the most puzzling aspects of human nature. It is a paradox because people often delay tasks they genuinely want or need to complete, even when they know it will lead to stress or regret later. Why do we postpone things that matter? Why do we choose short-term comfort over long-term benefit, despite knowing the consequences? The procrastination paradox lies in this gap between intention and action. It is not simply about laziness or a lack of discipline. Rather, it is a deeper struggle with time, priorities, and emotional responses. Imagine someone sitting down to work on an important project. The deadline is approaching, and they understand that the task requires immediate attention. Yet instead of beginning, they find themselves scrolling through their phone, organizing their desk, or engaging in other seemingly trivial activities. They justify these distractions as minor preparations, but in reality, they are avoiding the real work. This avoidance creates a cycle. The more they delay, the more the task looms over them, generating anxiety. That anxiety, in turn, makes it even harder to begin, leading to further procrastination. This self-reinforcing loop traps people, leaving them frustrated and wondering why they cannot break free. Understanding how the brain works helps explain the procrastination paradox. The brain prioritizes short-term rewards over long-term goals. When faced with a task that feels challenging or overwhelming, it instinctively seeks relief from that discomfort. Distractions, watching videos, chatting with friends, or even doing other less urgent tasks offer a quick dopamine boost, providing temporary relief. However, this short-term comfort often results in long-term stress as deadlines approach and unfinished tasks pile up. Another key factor in procrastination is how people perceive time. When a deadline feels distant, the brain underestimates its urgency. Tasks seem manageable in the future, making it easy to delay them. But as the deadline nears, time suddenly feels compressed, and the task that once seemed simple now appears overwhelming. This shift in perception often triggers a frantic rush to complete the work, leading to stress and, in many cases, lower quality results. For some, procrastination stems from a fear of failure. The idea of starting a task can bring up doubts. What if the work is not good enough? What if others judge it harshly? To avoid these uncomfortable thoughts, they delay beginning altogether. Ironically, this delay increases the likelihood of failure by reducing the time available to complete the task properly. This fear-based procrastination can feel paralyzing and often leads to guilt and frustration. Others procrastinate due to perfectionism. They set unrealistically high standards for their work, making the process of starting feel overwhelming. The fear of producing something imperfect causes them to avoid the task altogether. In their minds, delaying is preferable to facing potential disappointment. A common misconception is that procrastination is simply a failure of time management. While time management plays a role, momentum is another key factor. Once people begin a task, they often realize it is not as difficult as they imagined. The act of starting generates a sense of progress, which makes it easier to continue. But reaching that starting point is where procrastination takes hold. Small initial actions, writing a single sentence or organizing materials, can lower the emotional barrier to starting and pave the way for sustained effort. It is also important to recognize that procrastination is not always negative. Sometimes, delaying a task allows for reflection and better planning. Creative work, for instance, often benefits from periods of incubation, where ideas develop unconsciously before being put into action. Procrastination only becomes problematic when it leads to unnecessary stress, missed opportunities, or diminished results. Distinguishing between productive delay and harmful procrastination helps people use their time more effectively. For many, overcoming procrastination requires understanding their personal patterns and triggers. Self-awareness is a powerful tool. When individuals recognize why they procrastinate, whether due to fear, perfectionism, or uncertainty, they can take steps to address these barriers. Someone who feels overwhelmed by a large project, for example, might benefit from breaking it into smaller specific tasks. Someone who fears failure might remind themselves that imperfect action is better than no action at all. Another effective approach is to reframe how tasks are perceived. Instead of focusing on a task's difficulty, individuals can focus on its benefits. Rather than thinking, "I have to finish this tedious report," they might think, "Completing this report will bring me closer to my goals." This shift in perspective reduces resistance and makes the task feel more meaningful. External factors also play a role. The modern world is full of distractions: social media, endless entertainment, and constant notifications. These distractions make it easier than ever to avoid difficult tasks. Creating an environment that minimizes distractions can significantly improve focus. Simple strategies like turning off notifications, setting designated work times, or using productivity tools to block distracting websites can help cultivate a focus-friendly space. Ultimately, the procrastination paradox reveals how deeply human this behavior is. It is not about weakness or failure. It is about the complex ways people navigate time, emotions, and priorities. By understanding the psychological mechanisms behind procrastination and developing strategies to address them, individuals can break free from its grip. They can transition from a cycle of delay and regret. The difficulty lies in determining where to draw this boundary. What distinguishes harmful intolerance from a mere difference of opinion? Societies and individuals may arrive at different conclusions on this matter. Some argue that hate speech is inherently intolerant and should be restricted, as it fosters an environment of fear and division. Others contend that the best way to combat harmful rhetoric is not through suppression, but through counter-arguments and open debate. This ongoing debate revolves around a central dilemma. How can we prevent intolerance from eroding tolerance without becoming intolerant ourselves? One useful approach is to focus on actions rather than beliefs. Individuals may hold intolerant views privately without acting on them in ways that harm others. For example, someone might harbor prejudices but never advocate for violence or enact policies that infringe upon others' rights. In such cases, their personal beliefs, however objectionable, do not pose an immediate danger to society. However, when these beliefs manifest in actions, such as inciting violence, spreading dangerous propaganda, or implementing discriminatory laws, they cross into the realm of harmful intolerance that a society cannot afford to tolerate. History offers numerous cautionary tales about the consequences of unchecked intolerance. The rise of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century, such as Nazi Germany, illustrates this phenomenon with chilling clarity. The Nazi Party initially used the freedoms of a democratic society to spread its ideology. Once in power, however, they dismantled those very freedoms, suppressing dissent and persecuting those they deemed undesirable. This tragic period serves as a stark reminder that tolerating intolerance can have devastating consequences, reinforcing the need for vigilance in protecting democratic values. That said, countering intolerance does not always require censorship or suppression. Education, dialogue, and social accountability can be powerful tools in addressing intolerant behavior. Encouraging individuals to question their assumptions, engage in meaningful discussions, and develop empathy can be more effective than simply banning harmful ideas. Public campaigns that promote inclusivity and understanding can combat the spread of hate without resorting to authoritarian measures. There is also a practical side to the paradox of tolerance. In any society, some degree of enforcement is necessary to maintain order and protect fundamental rights. This may involve implementing laws against hate crimes, regulating harmful misinformation, or ensuring that public discourse remains constructive. These measures are not violations of tolerance, but rather safeguards that preserve the conditions necessary for a tolerant society to function. Without such protections, tolerance itself can be eroded by those who seek to exploit its openness for destructive ends. A useful analogy is to think of tolerance as a principle that, like all values, requires boundaries to sustain itself. Just as freedom of speech does not include the right to incite violence or falsely shout fire in a crowded theater, tolerance does not demand that we accept ideologies that seek to dismantle the rights and safety of others. Setting limits is not a betrayal of tolerance. It is a means of protecting it. Critics of the paradox of tolerance argue that it can be misused as a justification for suppressing dissenting views or unpopular opinions. There is a legitimate concern that labeling something as intolerant could become a way to silence legitimate criticism, or prevent meaningful debate. This is why it is crucial to establish clear and consistent criteria for distinguishing between healthy discourse and genuinely harmful intolerance. The goal should always be to strike a balance, safeguarding the rights and safety of individuals while ensuring that a diverse range of perspectives can coexist. In the digital age, the paradox of tolerance has taken on new significance, particularly in the realm of social media and online platforms. The internet has created unprecedented opportunities for communication and the exchange of ideas, but it has also facilitated the spread of hate speech, disinformation, and extremism. Online platforms face the difficult challenge of deciding how to regulate content while upholding principles of free expression. Should they remove posts that promote intolerance, or should they allow them to remain visible in the hope that they can be countered with better arguments? These questions mirror the broader societal struggle of how to uphold tolerance without enabling its destruction. The paradox of tolerance does not offer a simple solution, nor does it provide a universal rule that applies in every situation. Instead, it prompts us to reflect on the kind of society we wish to create and the measures necessary to protect it. Tolerance is a vital and noble ideal, but it cannot survive without thoughtful boundaries. By recognizing the limits of tolerance, we can build a world in which freedom, diversity, and mutual respect can truly flourish. In doing so, we uphold not only the principle of tolerance itself, but also the humanity it seeks to preserve. The paradox of hedonism reveals a counterintuitive truth. The more directly one pursues pleasure, the harder it becomes to attain. At first glance, this seems puzzling. After all, isn't the pursuit of happiness and enjoyment the essence of life? Yet a deeper exploration of this paradox unveils a profound insight. Pleasure is not something that can be seized and held onto. Rather, it often arises as a byproduct of engaging in meaningful activities, pursuing goals, and cultivating certain mindsets. Ironically, the more one fixates on pleasure itself, the more elusive it tends to become. Consider someone whose sole ambition is to experience joy. They wake each day asking, "What will make me feel good?" They might indulge in entertainment, consume their favorite foods, or seek out thrilling experiences. For a time, this seems fulfilling, but inevitably, the excitement wanes. The same activities that once felt exhilarating begin to lose their charm. This is because pleasure, when treated as the ultimate objective, leads to diminishing returns. The harder one tries to maximize enjoyment, the less they ultimately derive from it. The pursuit of pleasure, taken to an extreme, paradoxically results in dissatisfaction. A simple illustration of this paradox can be found in eating a beloved dessert. The first bite is exquisite, sweet, rich, and deeply satisfying. By the third or fourth bite, the sensation dulls. Continue eating, and what was once delightful becomes mundane or even unpleasant. The initial joy dissipates because pleasure, when overly pursued, loses its potency. Now contrast this with a different approach. Someone who does not actively chase pleasure, but instead dedicates themselves to meaningful pursuits. Perhaps they immerse themselves in painting, volunteer to help their community, or engage in personal growth. These activities may not always provide immediate gratification. Some may even be challenging or demand effort. Yet, over time, they yield a deeper, more enduring sense of fulfillment. The joy they experience is not a result of directly seeking pleasure, but rather an unintended yet natural consequence of engaging in something meaningful. This is the central lesson of the paradox of hedonism. Pleasure is most reliably attained when pursued indirectly. Philosophers and psychologists have long recognized this phenomenon. John Stuart Mill, a 19th century thinker, observed that happiness cannot be pursued in itself. Instead, it arises when people focus on other endeavors, such as relationships, self-improvement, or contributing to the greater good. Mill likened happiness to a shadow. It follows us when we are engaged in meaningful action, but disappears when we turn to chase it directly. This perspective is supported by modern psychology. Studies show that this insight has profound implications for how we approach life. If directly chasing pleasure often leads to frustration and emptiness, what should one do instead? The answer lies in shifting focus. Instead of constantly asking, "What will make me happy right now?" one might consider, "What will give my life meaning?" or "What activities genuinely engage and fulfill me?" By pursuing passions, cultivating relationships, and striving for meaningful achievements, one is far more likely to experience lasting joy, not as a direct goal, but as a natural consequence. For instance, imagine someone who finds joy in gardening. They spend hours planting, weeding, and tending to their crops. At times, the work is physically demanding and tedious. Yet, over time, the sight of blooming flowers or a thriving vegetable garden brings a deep sense of satisfaction. The pleasure they derive was never their primary aim. Rather, it emerged as an unintended yet beautiful outcome of their dedication and effort. This principle applies equally to human relationships. If someone views relationships purely as a means to derive happiness, they may become disillusioned when things are not constantly joyful. However, if they focus on being a loving partner, a supportive friend, or a caring parent, investing effort and kindness into their connections, the relationship itself becomes a profound source of joy. Happiness arises not from grasping at it, but from fostering love and connection. The paradox of hedonism also helps explain why overindulgence often leads to dissatisfaction. When one prioritizes pleasure above all else, they risk becoming desensitized to it. Someone who constantly seeks novelty or excitement may find that the same experiences that once thrilled them no longer hold the same allure. This is because the human brain adapts to repeated stimuli. Even the most exhilarating activities lose their impact if they are overdone. In contrast, moderation allows for greater appreciation, savoring life's pleasures without exhausting them. This does not mean one should avoid pleasure altogether. Pleasure is an essential and enriching part of life. The key is to approach it with balance and perspective. When treated as a byproduct of meaningful engagement rather than the primary objective, pleasure becomes more sustainable and fulfilling. Ultimately, the paradox of hedonism is not a problem to be solved, but a truth to be understood. Life is not about the endless pursuit of fleeting highs. The paradox of voting, also known as the Downs paradox, presents a compelling contradiction in human behavior. On the surface, voting appears to be a straightforward civic duty, an act that millions engage in during elections. However, when examined through the lens of logic and mathematics, a perplexing question arises. Why do people vote at all? In most elections, the likelihood of a single vote determining the outcome is astonishingly small. Given the time and effort required to cast a ballot, the personal cost of voting often outweighs the probability of making a tangible impact. Yet despite this, millions of individuals across the world continue to participate in elections. This paradox challenges conventional notions of rational decision-making and prompts deeper inquiries into human motivation, societal values, and the nature of democracy itself. At the core of this paradox is the idea that, from a purely rational perspective, voting appears to be an irrational act. Economists and political scientists often frame the decision to vote in terms of cost-benefit analysis. The costs include the time spent registering, traveling to a polling place, waiting in line, and researching candidates or policies. The benefit, on the other hand, is theoretically the chance of influencing the election's outcome, multiplied by the perceived value of one's preferred candidate winning. The issue arises because, in large-scale elections with millions of voters, the probability of casting the decisive vote is virtually negligible. Statistically speaking, the expected benefit of voting is often lower than the cost, suggesting that a purely rational individual should abstain from voting. And yet, voter participation remains widespread. This disconnect between theory and reality is what makes the paradox so fascinating. If rational self-interest fails to fully explain voter behavior, what else compels people to cast their ballots? One possibility is the concept of civic duty. Many individuals view voting as a moral or social responsibility, an obligation to contribute to the democratic process, regardless of the statistical impact of their individual vote. Unlike cost-benefit calculations, the sense of duty is not dependent on the likelihood of influencing an election's outcome. Instead, it stems from a belief that participation is inherently valuable, reinforcing the collective legitimacy of democratic governance. Social influence also plays a crucial role. In many societies, voting is seen as a mark of responsible citizenship. Individuals may vote not out of a belief that their ballot will be decisive, but because of social expectations. Fear of disapproval or a desire to align with the behavior of peers can be powerful motivators. Political campaigns often leverage this by highlighting high voter turnout rates, reinforcing the idea that voting is the norm. When individuals perceive that others around them are voting, they may feel compelled to do the same, not out of rational calculation, but out of social conformity. Beyond civic duty and social pressure, voting can also be intrinsically rewarding. Many people derive psychological satisfaction from participating in elections, experiencing a sense of agency and engagement in shaping their future. The symbolic power of casting a ballot can evoke feelings of empowerment, reinforcing an individual's sense of belonging within a democratic society. This emotional fulfillment, akin to signing a petition or attending a protest, exists in identity further complicates the paradox. For those who strongly align with a political party or ideology, voting becomes an expression of their personal and collective identity. Casting a ballot is not just about influencing an election, it's about affirming one's allegiance to a cause, a movement, or a shared set of values. This sense of belonging can be a stronger motivator than any probability-based analysis, driving individuals to vote even when they recognize that their single ballot is unlikely to alter the outcome. The paradox also invites reflection on the broader implications of voter participation. If most individuals abstained from voting due to the minuscule probability of their ballot being decisive, democratic systems would risk losing legitimacy. The very functioning of democracy depends on widespread engagement, making the collective act of voting essential, even if each individual vote holds little weight in isolation. This creates a paradoxical situation. Voting may seem irrational on an individual level, but it remains indispensable on a societal scale. The strength of democracy lies not in any single vote, but in the collective expression of millions. Curiously, the paradox becomes even more pronounced when examining local elections. In smaller electoral contests, where voter turnout is lower, the probability of a single vote making a difference increases. Paradoxically, participation rates tend to decline in such elections, suggesting that motivations like civic duty, identity, and social influence may be stronger determinants of voter behavior than pure mathematical probability. Some theorists argue that the paradox of voting exposes the limitations of rational choice theory. Human behavior, they suggest, is not always dictated by cold, numerical calculations of cost and benefit. Instead, emotions, social values, and ingrained beliefs often exert a more significant influence than logic alone. This does not necessarily mean that voting is irrational. Rather, it reveals that the motivations behind it are far more complex than traditional models suggest. Ultimately, this paradox underscores a fundamental truth about democratic participation. While an individual vote may seem insignificant, democracy itself relies on the collective act of voting. The power of the system emerges from the shared commitment of citizens who believe in the importance of participation, regardless of their individual influence on the outcome. People vote not because they expect to single-handedly change the course of an election, but because they recognize the broader significance of engagement. This belief sustains democratic institutions, even in the face of seemingly irrational behavior. The paradox also carries practical implications for encouraging voter turnout. If participation is not solely driven by rational calculations, then strategies aimed at increasing engagement should focus less on emphasizing the probability of making a difference and more on reinforcing the intrinsic value of voting. Messages that highlight civic responsibility, personal empowerment, and the collective nature of democracy are more likely to inspire action than appeals based on electoral math. Campaigns that connect voting to identity, social belonging, and moral duty can be particularly effective in fostering long-term engagement. At its core, the equality paradox highlights the complexities and contradictions that arise when striving for fairness in society. At first glance, equality seems straightforward. Everyone should have the same rights, opportunities, and access to resources. However, when put into practice, efforts to create equality often lead to unintended consequences. In trying to correct disparities, new forms of inequality can emerge, challenging our understanding of what fairness truly entails. A key aspect of this paradox lies in the distinction between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. Equality of opportunity ensures that everyone starts with the same chances in life, such as providing free education to all children, regardless of background. Equality of outcome, by contrast, seeks to minimize disparities in results, often through redistributive policies like wealth transfers or targeted support programs. The contradiction arises because striving for one type of equality can undermine the other. Take education as an example. A system that offers equal access to schools and resources aims to ensure fairness in opportunity. Yet, even when starting from the same place, students achieve different results due to personal circumstances. Some thrive with family support, while others struggle with poverty or illness. To correct these discrepancies, governments may provide additional resources to disadvantaged students. However, this effort to level the playing field can lead to resentment among those who are already succeeding, who may perceive these adjustments as unfair advantages for others. A similar dynamic occurs in the workplace. Companies that seek gender equality in leadership positions may implement policies such as quotas, ensuring a balanced representation of men and women. While these measures are designed to correct historical imbalances, they can create tensions if employees feel that hiring decisions are based on demographics rather than merit. Thus, an effort to eliminate one form of inequality may inadvertently introduce another. Economic systems also illustrate the equality paradox. In capitalist societies, wealth is often distributed based on effort, skill, or innovation, leading to disparities in income and financial success. Governments attempt to address these inequalities through taxation and social programs, redistributing wealth to support lower-income groups. While these measures aim to create a fairer society, they can also foster divisions. Some wealthier individuals may feel unfairly penalized for their success, while others argue that the assistance provided is insufficient to truly close the gap. This tension between incentives and redistribution creates an ongoing cycle of debate over fairness and economic justice. At the heart of the paradox is the concept of fairness itself. People hold differing views on what fairness means. Some believe that true fairness requires treating everyone the same, while others argue that fairness means acknowledging differences and providing extra support to those in need. These conflicting perspectives influence policies on education, healthcare, and wealth distribution, often leading to disagreements on what equality should look like in practice. History provides many examples of the equality paradox in action. The civil rights movement in the United States fought to dismantle systemic racial inequalities, advocating for equal rights and opportunities. However, policies such as affirmative action, designed to address historical disadvantages, sparked debates about whether they created new forms of discrimination. Supporters saw these measures as necessary to correct systemic injustices, while critics argued they undermined the principles of merit and individual achievement. Similarly, socialist movements in the 20th century aimed to eliminate economic inequality through wealth redistribution and state control of resources. While these efforts succeeded in reducing income disparities in some cases, they also encountered challenges such as inefficiency, corruption, and restrictions on individual freedoms. Many citizens grew frustrated when hard work was not adequately rewarded, while others exploited the system. The paradox of equality is not just a large-scale societal issue. It appears in everyday situations as well. Consider a group of friends splitting a restaurant bill. Some may believe that the fair approach is dividing the bill equally, regardless of what each person ordered. Others may argue that fairness means paying only for what one consumed. While both perspectives have logical merit, disagreements over fairness can create tension, mirroring the larger societal challenges of navigating equality. Psychological research also sheds light on this paradox. Studies show that people are highly sensitive to perceived unfairness, whether they feel disadvantaged or unduly favored. This sensitivity complicates efforts to implement fair policies, as even well-intentioned measures can provoke resentment or feelings of entitlement. So how can societies navigate the equality paradox? One approach is to shift the focus from equality to equity. While equality aims to treat everyone the same, equity acknowledges that individuals have different needs and circumstances. By tailoring support rather than applying a uniform approach, equity seeks to achieve more meaningful fairness. In education, for instance, equity might mean allocating more resources to schools in disadvantaged areas, rather than distributing funding equally across all institutions. This approach recognizes existing disparities and seeks to address them in a way that promotes genuine opportunity. Another key strategy is fostering open dialogue about fairness and equality. When people feel included in decision-making processes, they are more likely to support policies that promote equality, even if they do not directly benefit. Empathy, transparency, and a willingness to engage in nuanced discussions are essential in navigating these complex issues. Ultimately, the equality paradox reminds us that there are no perfect solutions. Achieving fairness requires ongoing reflection, adaptation, and compromise. No system can eliminate all inequalities or satisfy every definition of fairness. However, by striving for balance between opportunity and outcome, fairness and incentive, individual rights and collective responsibility, we can work toward a more just and inclusive society. Rather than seeing the equality paradox as an obstacle, we can view it as a guide, encouraging us to approach social progress with humility, understanding, and a commitment to continuous improvement. The non-identity paradox is one of those philosophical dilemmas that challenge our understanding of ethics, responsibility, and the long-term consequences of our actions. It forces us to confront difficult questions about morality, particularly when our choices impact individuals who do not yet exist. At its core, the paradox arises from the realization that the decisions we make today shape the very identities of future people, leading to a perplexing question. How can we be said to harm or benefit someone if our actions are the reason they exist in the first place? Consider a simple scenario. A couple is deciding when to have a child. If they conceive now, the child will likely be born with a health condition due to environmental factors or genetic predispositions. If they wait a few months, they can significantly reduce these risks. However, the child born later will not be the same individual as the one they would have conceived earlier. In this case, the child with the health condition cannot claim that they would have been better off had their parents delayed conception, because if their parents had made that choice, they would not have been born at all. This is the essence of the non-identity paradox. How do we assess the morality of decisions that determine who will exist, rather than merely affecting existing individuals? This paradox defies our usual ways of thinking about harm and benefit. Typically, we assume that harming someone means making them worse off than they otherwise would have been. But in cases where an alternative choice would have led to an entirely different person being born, this comparison becomes impossible. How do we determine whether an action is harmful if the alternative scenario involves a different person existing altogether? Take another example. A government decides to build a power plant. The plant will provide essential energy for decades, but will also release pollutants that may negatively impact the health of future generations. Those born after the plant is constructed will inherit a world shaped by that decision. But here's the dilemma. If the government had chosen not to build the plant, the exact same individuals who suffer from the pollution would not exist. Different choices would have led to different environmental conditions, which in turn would have led to different people being born. Can those affected by pollution claim they were harmed if the very decision that exposed them to harm was also the reason they came into existence? This paradox becomes even more complex when considering global issues like climate change. Decisions made today regarding fossil fuel consumption, deforestation, and carbon emissions will shape the world for generations to come. Future individuals will be born into conditions created by these choices. But can they argue they have been wronged if they owe their existence to the same conditions that cause their suffering? The non-identity paradox has profound implications for policymaking, ethics, and our understanding of moral responsibility. Governments and societies often justify regulations and policies on the basis of protecting future generations. Yet the paradox challenges this assumption. If our choices shape who will be born, how can we claim to be safeguarding or harming individuals who would not exist otherwise? One approach to resolving this dilemma is shifting our focus away from individual identities and toward overall outcomes. Instead of asking whether a particular person has been harmed, we might ask whether our decisions make the world better or worse overall. For instance, rather than debating whether the child born with a health condition is worse off than a hypothetical child who could have been born later, we might evaluate whether the couple's choice led to a world with less suffering or better overall well-being. However, this shift in perspective raises new challenges. How do we define a better or worse world? Who determines what constitutes progress, and by what criteria? Ethical theories that prioritize collective well-being, such as utilitarianism, might offer a framework for these questions, but they do not eliminate the underlying philosophical tension. Another way of addressing the paradox is through the concept of intergenerational justice. Even if we cannot claim that specific future individuals are harmed by our choices, we may still have a moral obligation to ensure that future generations as a whole inherit a livable and just world. This perspective does not rely on comparing the well-being of hypothetical individuals, but instead emphasizes fairness across time. It acknowledges that while we may not owe anything to any one specific future person, we do have a responsibility to avoid creating unnecessary suffering for those who come after us. At the same time, the non-identity paradox highlights the deep interconnectedness of our choices. Every decision we make sends ripples through time, influencing an infinite chain of events that determine not only the conditions of future societies, but also the very identities of the people who will live in them. This realization can be overwhelming. It forces us to acknowledge the immense responsibility we hold in shaping the future. But the paradox also serves as a lesson in humility. It reveals the limits of our moral frameworks, showing that some ethical questions may not have simple or definitive answers. It challenges our intuitive ideas about harm, benefit, and responsibility, urging us to think beyond black and white, moral judgments. Ultimately, the non-identity paradox is not about solving a puzzle or arriving at a clear-cut answer. It is about engaging with the profound and often unsettling implications of our actions. It reminds us that ethical decision-making is not just about right and wrong in the present, but about navigating the vast, complex web of consequences that stretch far beyond our own lifetimes. By grappling with these difficult questions, we can develop a more thoughtful and intentional approach to how we shape the world, not only for ourselves, but for the generations. The prediction paradox is one of those perplexing ideas that forces us to reconsider our understanding of cause and effect. At first glance, it seems straightforward, yet the more we analyze it, the more entangled it becomes. At its core, the paradox raises a fundamental question. Can the future truly be predicted? And if so, does the act of making a prediction alter the course of events? The very notion of foreseeing the future implies the potential to change it. But if we do, was the prediction ever valid to begin with? Consider a simple scenario. A fortune teller predicts that tomorrow you will take a specific route home and, along the way, run into an old friend you haven't seen in years. Intrigued by the prediction, you decide to follow that path and, sure enough, you meet your friend just as foretold. At first, it appears that the prediction was accurate, but was it truly? Had you never heard the prediction, would you have taken the same route? Was the very act of hearing the prophecy what influenced your decision, thereby making it come true? Now, take this further. Suppose you deliberately attempt to defy the prediction by choosing an entirely different route home, determined to prove it wrong. Yet by sheer coincidence, your old friend happens to be on this alternative path as well. In that case, the prediction still manifests, but in a way that was unexpected. This leads to an unsettling realization. Is the future fixed, or are we actively shaping it even as we attempt to foresee it? The paradox grows even more intricate when we extend it beyond individual choices to larger systems. Consider weather forecasting. Meteorologists predict a storm, prompting people to take precautions. They secure their homes, stock up on supplies, and in some cases, evacuate. Because of these actions, the storm causes far less damage than it otherwise might have. But this raises a question. Was the prediction accurate in anticipating what would have naturally happened? Or did it create a new reality by changing human behavior? If no prediction had been made, would the storm's impact have been greater? This reveals a fundamental dilemma. Does making a prediction inevitably influence the very outcome it seeks to describe? This feedback loop is at the heart of the prediction paradox. Predictions do not exist in isolation. They interact with reality the moment they are made. People respond to forecasts, alter their behaviors, and in doing so, either reinforce, nullify, or even generate entirely new outcomes. The result is a tangled relationship between foreknowledge and causality. Did the prediction simply describe an inevitable event, or did it, in some way, bring that event into existence? Technology further complicates this dynamic. Algorithms now predict human behavior in numerous ways, from suggesting what we might watch next on a streaming platform to determining the most efficient route for our commute. But these predictions are not passive. They shape our choices. A recommendation system does not merely reflect our preferences, it actively influences them. Over time, as we engage with these recommendations, our behavior begins to align with what the algorithm expects, blurring the line between free will and prediction. Are our decisions truly our own, or are they subtly guided by predictive models? Similar feedback loops exist in finance, where market forecasts influence investor behavior, or in law enforcement, where predictive policing anticipates where crimes might occur. In both cases, the act of prediction alters decision-making, creating a future that may not have existed otherwise. This is neither inherently positive nor negative. It is simply an unavoidable aspect of how predictions function. But it underscores the paradox. Knowing the future and shaping it are inseparably linked. This paradox also forces us to confront deep philosophical questions about free will. If someone tells you what will happen tomorrow, do you still have the power to change it? At first, the answer seems clear. Of course you do. The future has not yet occurred, so you remain free to choose differently. But the paradox challenges this assumption. If you do alter your course, was the prediction ever truly valid? Or was it simply describing one of many possible futures? And if the prediction inevitably influenced your actions, did you ever have true agency to begin with? Throughout history, thinkers have debated whether the universe operates in a deterministic or fluid manner. Some argue that all events are part of an unbreakable causal chain, meaning the future is already set, even if we cannot perceive it yet. In this view, predictions are not altering reality. They are merely revealing what is destined to unfold. Others, however, suggest that reality is shaped by present choices, and that no future can ever be fully known in advance, because it remains subject to infinite variables. One intriguing variation of the prediction paradox is the self-fulfilling prophecy. This occurs when a prediction actively brings about the very outcome it describes. For example, if a teacher tells a student that they are destined to succeed, the student may develop greater confidence, work harder, and ultimately achieve success as a direct result of the expectation. Conversely, if a student is told they will fail, they may internalize this belief, lose motivation, and struggle, thus fulfilling the negative prediction. Conversely, a prediction can also fail precisely because people act to prevent it. Suppose an economist warns of an impending financial collapse. Governments and institutions take drastic measures to stabilize the economy, thereby preventing the collapse from occurring. The twin paradox stands as one of the most intriguing concepts in physics, challenging our fundamental understanding of time and its behavior under different conditions. Rooted in Einstein's theory of relativity, it presents a scenario that requires no deep knowledge of complex mathematics to grasp. At its core, The paradox examines how time is experienced differently when two individuals, starting from the same point, follow divergent paths through the universe. Imagine two identical twins, Alex and Jamie, born at the exact same time and living together on Earth. One day, Alex embarks on a journey into deep space aboard a spaceship capable of traveling at speeds close to the speed of light, while Jamie remains on Earth. The journey lasts for several years, and eventually, Alex returns home. Upon their reunion, something astonishing is revealed. Alex has aged significantly less than Jamie. This difference is not an illusion or a trick of perception. It is a real, measurable effect predicted by Einstein's theory of relativity. To Jamie, who remained on Earth, time flowed as expected. Days turned into months, months into years. But for Alex, moving at an incredibly high velocity, time progressed at a much slower rate. This effect, known as time dilation, arises from the principles of relativity, which show that time is not an absolute fixed entity, but rather something that depends on motion and gravitational conditions. The faster an object moves, the slower time passes for it relative to an observer who remains stationary. While this phenomenon is imperceptible at everyday speeds, it becomes dramatically evident as one approaches the speed of light. From Alex's perspective, an apparent contradiction emerges. Since motion is relative, one might argue that it was Jamie who was moving away at high speed, not Alex. Shouldn't that mean time slowed down for Jamie instead? This is where the key to resolving the paradox lies. Unlike Jamie, Alex's journey involved acceleration and deceleration. When leaving Earth, changing direction in space, and returning, relativity treats acceleration differently from constant motion, and this asymmetry is what results in Alex experiencing less time overall. The twin paradox is not just a theoretical construct. Its effects have been confirmed through precise scientific experiments. Though we have yet to send humans on near light speed journeys, scientists have tested time dilation using highly accurate atomic clocks. In one experiment, a clock was placed on an airplane flying at high speed, while another identical clock remained on the ground. When compared after the flight, the airborne clock showed slightly less elapsed time, just as relativity predicts. The effect was minuscule due to the plane's relatively low speed, but it provided direct evidence of time dilation in action. Beyond theoretical implications, the paradox has practical significance in modern technology. The satellites that power GPS navigation orbit Earth at high speeds and in weaker gravitational fields, both of which influence their experience of time compared to people on the planet's surface. Engineers must account for these effects to ensure accurate GPS readings. Without adjustments for relativity, errors would accumulate rapidly, rendering the system unreliable. On a deeper level, the twin paradox raises profound philosophical and existential questions. The paradox also invites speculation about the future of space travel. If humans ever develop spacecraft capable of reaching relativistic speeds, interstellar journeys could allow astronauts to experience a vastly different passage of time compared to those left behind. Imagine an explorer setting off on a mission to a distant star, only to return to an Earth that has transformed beyond recognition, where loved ones have aged or passed away, and civilizations have evolved in unforeseen ways. At its heart, the twin paradox serves as a reminder that time is not a simple, unchanging flow, but a dynamic, malleable aspect of reality. It forces us to see time not as a rigid sequence, but as something that bends and stretches depending on motion and gravity. In many ways, it is not just a story about physics, it is a lesson in perspective. just as Alex and Jamie perceive time differently. People in our everyday lives often experience the world through unique lenses shaped by their own conditions and experiences. Recognizing these differences can lead to a deeper understanding of both science and human nature. Ultimately, the paradox is more than just a curiosity. It is a glimpse into the astonishing complexities of the universe. It challenges us to rethink our assumptions and embrace a cosmos where time itself is relative, a reality far more intricate and wondrous than our everyday experience suggests. The whole argument presents a profound philosophical challenge within the study of physics, particularly in the context of general relativity. At its core, it questions the relationship between mathematics, physical reality, and how we describe the universe. It forces us to ask whether the structures we use to explain space, time, and matter truly correspond to reality, or if they are merely conceptual tools that help us organize our understanding. To grasp the depth of this argument, we must first consider the foundations of general relativity. In Einstein's theory, space-time is not a fixed stage upon which objects move, but a four-dimensional continuum that merges the three spatial dimensions with time. This fabric of space-time is shaped by the presence of mass and energy, curving, bending, and influencing the motion of objects through what we perceive as gravity. The behavior of space-time is described by Einstein's field equations, which mathematically relate the distribution of matter and energy to the curvature of space-time. Now, imagine using these equations to model a specific region of space-time, whether it contains stars, planets, or even just empty space. This mathematical model assigns certain properties, such as curvature and coordinates, to every point within the region, defining its structure. Implicit in this approach is the assumption that our mathematical description of space-time reflects an objective physical reality. The whole argument, however, calls this assumption into question. The argument becomes clear when we consider an empty region of space-time, a hole where no matter or energy exists. If space-time is a tangible entity, then it should have a definite structure, even in the absence of matter. But according to the whole argument, general relativity does not uniquely determine the properties of this empty region based solely on the distribution of matter outside it. This is because the equations of general relativity remain valid even if we shift, relabel, or deform the mathematical coordinates describing the whole. In other words, multiple equally valid mathematical descriptions can exist for the same physical scenario, raising the question, if different mathematical models can describe the same reality, then what is reality itself? This ambiguity leads to a troubling conclusion. Space-time, at least in the way we describe it, might not be a concrete physical entity, but rather a conceptual framework. Our mathematical descriptions of space-time appear to be flexible and arbitrary, rather than uniquely determined by physical laws. To illustrate this issue, consider a simple analogy: a city map. The map assigns coordinates to locations like streets and parks. If you shift the entire map slightly, the actual locations of the streets and parks in the city remain unchanged. What changes is merely the labeling system. Likewise, in general relativity, shifting the coordinates of space-time points does not alter the underlying physics, suggesting that space-time itself, like a map, might lack independent existence in the absence of matter to define it. This insight gives rise to deeper philosophical questions. If space-time is not a physical thing, but merely a way of describing relationships between objects, then what exactly is its nature? Some physicists and philosophers argue that space-time is relational. It only exists insofar as it describes how objects interact. In this view, distances, intervals, and motion are not properties of an independent space-time, but rather relational features that emerge from interactions between physical entities. Without objects to define it, space-time itself becomes meaningless. Others, however, contend that space-time is real, but that our mathematical tools are simply insufficient. The whole argument in this interpretation does not prove that space-time lacks reality. It only exposes the limitations of our models. The fact that multiple mathematical representations can describe the same physical situation might not mean space-time is unreal, but rather that our understanding remains incomplete. The whole argument also challenges the concept of determinism, the idea that the present state of the universe fully determines its future. In classical physics, if we know the exact properties of a system at one moment, we can predict its future behavior with certainty. But in general relativity, the whole argument suggests that the structure of space-time in a given region cannot always be uniquely determined by external conditions. This raises the possibility that the universe contains an inherent element of unpredictability. Even Einstein himself struggled with these ideas. While he initially embraced a relational view of space-time, he later reconsidered and sought alternative interpretations. The debate remains unresolved, with physicists and philosophers still offering differing perspectives. Some speculate that quantum mechanics, which governs behavior on microscopic scales, may hold the key to resolving the issue. Others propose that entirely new frameworks of physics are needed, perhaps even revisions to our understanding of gravity itself. Despite its abstract nature, the whole argument has practical significance. A deeper understanding of space-time is crucial for developing a unified theory of physics, one that reconciles general relativity with quantum mechanics. These two foundational theories describe the universe on vastly different scales, yet they remain incompatible. The Münchhausen Trilemma is a philosophical paradox that exposes the fundamental challenges of knowledge and justification. It forces us to confront the limits of human reasoning by questioning the way we justify what we claim to know. Named after the fictional Baron Münchhausen, who supposedly pulled himself out of a swamp by his own hair, the trilemma illustrates that any attempt to justify a belief inevitably leads to one of three unsatisfying outcomes, revealing the fragile foundation upon which our understanding rests. To see this dilemma in action, consider a basic claim. The Earth revolves around the Sun. If asked how we know this, one might point to scientific observations and physical laws. But if further questioned, how do we know these laws are true? We find ourselves in an endless search for justification. The Münchhausen Trilemma argues that all justification ultimately falls into one of three categories: circular reasoning, infinite regression, or axiomatic assumptions. Circular reasoning occurs when the justification for a claim relies on the claim itself. Suppose someone argues, "The Earth orbits the Sun because science says so." When asked why they trust science, they might reply, "Because it is based on reliable observations and experiments." But if pressed further, why are those observations and experiments trustworthy? The answer often circles back to the original claim: because science confirms them. This type of reasoning, though it may feel satisfying, fails to provide a true foundation. It is like trying to pull oneself up by one's own bootstraps. It gives the illusion of justification without actually making progress. The second outcome is infinite regression. Here, every justification requires another, leading to an endless chain with no ultimate foundation. If we ask why the Earth revolves around the Sun and someone responds with the laws of gravity, we might then ask why those laws hold. They might point to mathematical models, but these too require justification. This cycle continues indefinitely, leaving us without a final answer. While infinite regression avoids circularity, it fails to provide an absolute stopping point, instead trapping us in an endless search for deeper explanations. The third possibility is to halt the chain of reasoning by accepting certain axioms as self-evident. This means declaring some fundamental principles as true without proof. For instance, one might say, "I accept the laws of physics as given." This avoids circular reasoning and infinite regression, but raises another issue. Why should we accept some assumptions and not others? In mathematics, axioms form the basis for entire systems of thought, yet they themselves remain unproven. This approach allows for practical reasoning, but it also exposes the inherent limitations of justification. Far from being an abstract thought experiment, the Münchhausen Trilemma has profound implications for everyday reasoning. Consider debates about ethics. If someone claims it is wrong to harm others, and we ask why, they might appeal to societal norms. But why are those norms valid? If they point to human empathy, we can then question why empathy should be the foundation of morality. At some point, they will either loop back to their original claim, engage in an infinite chain of reasoning, or declare a moral principle as self-evident. This realization can be unsettling. It suggests that our justifications, no matter how rigorous, eventually face a fundamental limitation. However, the trilemma is not meant to undermine knowledge itself, but rather to illuminate the constraints of human reasoning. It encourages us to think more critically about our assumptions and recognize the Philosophers have responded to the trilemma in different ways. Foundationalists argue that certain core beliefs must be accepted without proof, serving as the bedrock of knowledge. Coherentists suggest that beliefs are justified not by a single foundation, but by their coherence within a larger system. Pragmatists take a different approach, emphasizing usefulness over absolute justification. They argue that beliefs should be accepted not because they are proven beyond doubt, but because they are effective in practice. In science, the trilemma underscores the reliance on assumptions that cannot themselves be proven, such as the uniformity of nature or the reliability of human perception. While these assumptions are vulnerable to the trilemma, they provide a workable foundation for discovery. Science, recognizing the provisional nature of knowledge, remains open to revision as new evidence emerges, embodying a pragmatic response to the trilemma's challenge. Beyond academia, the trilemma serves as a valuable tool for critical thinking. It reminds us to question our assumptions, examine the strength of our reasoning, and approach disagreements with intellectual humility. It teaches us that while absolute certainty may be unattainable, the pursuit of knowledge remains valuable. Rather than seeking final answers, we refine our understanding through continuous questioning. Ultimately, the Münchhausen Trilemma reveals the depth and complexity of human thought. It shows that while we may never fully escape the challenges of justification, our ongoing efforts to understand the world still bring us closer to deeper insights. The trilemma does not demand resolution. It serves as a powerful reminder of the richness of intellectual inquiry and the enduring mystery of truth itself. Future Tuesday Indifference is a fascinating concept that challenges how we perceive time and make decisions. Imagine being asked to do something unpleasant, cleaning out a cluttered garage, filing your taxes, or delivering bad news. If the task is scheduled for next Tuesday, you might feel indifferent about it today. It seems distant and abstract, a concern for a future version of yourself. Yet, when that Tuesday finally arrives, the indifference vanishes. The task is now immediate, pressing, and unavoidable. This psychological disconnect between how we view future obligations versus their eventual reality reveals a fundamental truth about human nature. our minds prioritize the present over the future, a tendency known in psychology as temporal discounting. We instinctively value immediate experiences and emotions more than those that lie ahead. When a task is far off, it feels unreal. The discomfort or stress it may cause doesn't register as strongly. This is why we often agree to commitments for a distant date. Meetings, projects, or responsibilities that we would reject outright if they were scheduled for tomorrow. The further away something is, the less urgent or significant it seems. This mental bias also explains why we procrastinate. Consider a project with a 6-month deadline. At first, there's little urgency to begin, but as the deadline looms closer, the weight of the task grows heavier. That early indifference fades, replaced by stress and a scramble to catch up. The same dynamic applies to personal goals. Imagine committing to healthier eating or saving money. When the decision is hypothetical, it seems easy. Skipping dessert or setting aside money each month sounds reasonable. But when temptation is immediate, a rich chocolate cake in front of you or a flash sale online, the future benefit feels distant, while the present sacrifice feels real and difficult. Even positive experiences are subject to this phenomenon. Think of booking a vacation 6 months in advance. While there's excitement, the trip still feels remote. As the departure date nears, anticipation intensifies, making the experience more tangible. This effect extends to everyday pleasures. Promising yourself a relaxing weekend next month may sound appealing, but when the time comes, other obligations often take precedence. At its core, this pattern reflects how our brains process time. The future is inherently uncertain, while the present is immediate and concrete. From an evolutionary perspective, this focus on the short term was essential. Our ancestors needed to prioritize immediate survival over distant possibilities. Though modern life offers more stability, we still carry this mental framework, often favoring short-term gratification over long-term rewards. Recognizing future Tuesday indifference can help us make better choices. By understanding that our tendency to dismiss future tasks is a cognitive bias, we can counteract it. One effective strategy is to visualize our future selves facing the task. If cleaning the garage feels dreadful today, it's unlikely to feel any easier when the actual day arrives. Imagining the task in vivid detail, how it will feel, the effort involved, future Tuesday indifference also teaches the importance of setting boundaries. Because the future feels less pressing, we often overcommit, agreeing to obligations that later become burdensome. A simple yet powerful mental filter is to ask, would I agree to this if it were happening tomorrow? If the answer is no, it's likely not a commitment worth making. This concept also has implications for managing stress. Worrying excessively about the future is counterproductive. It doesn't alter the outcome. However, ignoring future responsibilities entirely leads to problems when they inevitably arrive. The key is balance, acknowledging future concerns without letting them dominate our thoughts. Planning ahead can reduce anxiety, but the only moment we can truly act upon is the present. Future Tuesday indifference isn't inherently negative. In some cases, it protects us from unnecessary stress. If every future obligation felt as immediate as today's tasks, the mental burden would be overwhelming. This bias helps us focus on the present. However, it becomes problematic when it leads to poor decision-making or chronic procrastination. Ultimately, this concept serves as a reminder to be mindful of how we engage with time. Focusing too much on the future can prevent us from fully experiencing the present, while ignoring the future can lead to regret. The key lies in striking a balance, being intentional with commitments, breaking tasks into manageable steps, and making choices with both the present and future in mind. By recognizing that the future will inevitably become the present, we can navigate our decisions with greater clarity and purpose, ensuring that when Tuesday finally arrives, we are ready to meet it with confidence rather than regret. The consequence paradox is a profound concept that challenges our understanding of causality and time. It revolves around the idea that certain events or actions can lead to outcomes that seemingly contradict their origins. This paradox becomes especially intriguing when applied to time travel, decision-making, and the fundamental nature of the universe. At its core, it forces us to ask whether the future can influence the past, or if an effect can exist without a clear cause. To grasp the essence of the consequence paradox, consider a hypothetical scenario. Suppose someone travels back in time and shares a crucial piece of information with their younger self, perhaps a stock tip that leads to immense wealth. The dilemma emerges when we ask, where did this information originate? The older version of the person only knew to invest in that company because they were told to do so in the past. This creates a loop where the knowledge exists without an identifiable point of origin. Can something exist if it was never truly created? This idea extends beyond time travel and into our fundamental understanding of cause and effect. Typically, we assume that every effect must stem from a preceding cause. If a stone is thrown into a pond, the ripples follow because of the impact. But what if the ripples appeared before the stone was thrown? What if an event occurred without an initiating cause? The consequence paradox forces us to grapple with such possibilities. A similar paradox arises in discussions of predestination. Imagine a person who discovers a mysterious book filled with scientific breakthroughs. Using its knowledge, they revolutionize the world and later invent a time machine. They decide to send the book back in time to their younger self, ensuring the cycle continues. But if the book's knowledge was never originally created, where did it come from? This paradox suggests that time may not be as linear as we perceive it, that events could form self-sustaining loops where causes and effects blur together. In science and philosophy, feedback loops help illustrate this concept. In systems theory, a feedback loop occurs when, on a broader scale, the consequence paradox invites us to reconsider the very fabric of reality. If time and causality are not as rigid as we assume, could there be alternate dimensions or frameworks where such paradoxes resolve themselves? While we may not yet have definitive answers, exploring these questions expands the limits of human understanding. Ultimately, the consequence paradox serves as a reminder of the universe's profound mysteries. It compels us to question the assumptions we take for granted and to embrace intellectual curiosity. Perhaps its true significance lies not in the confusion it creates, but in the growth it inspires. Whether encountered in scientific theories, philosophical debates, or thought experiments, this paradox challenges us to think beyond conventional logic and remain open to the unknown. Imagine walking through a dense forest, absorbed in the sounds of birds and the rustling leaves. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning strikes a nearby swamp. By some extraordinary chain of events, a bolt of lightning strikes a swamp, triggering a bizarre sequence of events. The energy interacts with the materials in the swamp, assembling them into a being, an exact physical replica of you. Every cell, every thought, every memory is identical. It looks like you, speaks like you, and remembers your entire life. It even believes it is you. This is the Swampman. Philosopher Donald Davidson introduced the Swampman Paradox to probe deep questions about identity, meaning, and consciousness. If this being is physically indistinguishable from you, Does it qualify as you? Is it the same person or something entirely different? These questions challenge our fundamental understanding of personal identity, memory, and continuity. One way to approach this dilemma is through the concept of identity. Many define identity as a combination of physical characteristics, memories, and personality. Since the Swampman possesses all your memories, your childhood, friendships, knowledge, and experiences, it seems reasonable to assume it is you. To everyone around, it would appear indistinguishable. But is identity merely a matter of appearance and memory, or does it require something more? A crucial aspect of identity is continuity, the connection between one's past and present self. When you see a scar from an injury, you recognize it as evidence of an event you experienced. The Swampman, however, lacks this direct connection. It remembers your graduation, but wasn't there. It recalls your favorite vacation, but never stood on that beach. Its memories exist, but they are the result of chance, not lived experience. Philosopher John Locke argued that memory is central to personal identity. By this logic, the Swampman is you because it recalls your past. But others contend that memory alone is insufficient. Identity, they argue, requires a deeper continuity, one that includes not just recollections, but the actual lived process of becoming who you are. Beyond identity, the paradox also raises questions about meaning. Davidson used this thought experiment to explore how meaning arises from experience. When you use the word tree, its meaning is shaped by all the trees you've seen, touched, and learned about. The Swampman, however, hasn't encountered actual trees. It uses the word only because its brain is structured like yours. If meaning comes from direct experience, can the Swampman truly understand language? Or is it merely mimicking a system of thought without true comprehension? The paradox also touches on the nature of consciousness. If the Swampman thinks, feels, and remembers just as you do, does it possess consciousness? On one hand, it seems impossible to deny. After all, it experiences joy, pain, and love. But on the other, its consciousness is severed from any actual history. It was never born, never grew up, never truly experienced the memories it holds. If consciousness is tied to experience, the Swampman might lack true self-awareness. This thought experiment forces us to re-examine real-world parallels. What about people with memory loss or dramatic personality changes? Are they still the same person? Or cases of brain injuries where a person's sense of self transforms? Do they remain them? If we deny the Swampman's identity, what does that mean for those who undergo profound psychological or neurological changes? The paradox also raises questions about what it means to be human. If the Swampman is not you, does that mean it is less human? Or does its ability to think, feel, and act make it human regardless of its origin? These questions challenge our assumptions about the nature of personhood and whether humanity is defined by history or present awareness. Ultimately, the Swampman Paradox is not about the plausibility of a lightning-induced duplicate, but about what it reveals about identity, meaning, and consciousness. By stripping away the usual processes of birth, growth, and experience, it exposes the assumptions we make about what it means to be us. It reminds us that identity is more than just memory or physical form. It is shaped by the connections between our past, present, and future, and the experiences that give our existence depth. Whether or not the Swampman truly counts as you, the paradox leaves us with more questions than answers, challenging us to think more deeply about what it truly means to exist. A fitting conclusion for a paradox that resists simple resolution, the noisy argument paradox reveals something profound about human nature, communication, and the way disagreements unfold. At its core, it suggests a counterintuitive truth. The louder and more intense an argument becomes, the less likely it is to resolve anything. But this paradox isn't just about literal volume. It's about emotional intensity, the stakes of the discussion, and the extent to which both sides focus on winning rather than understanding. The more forcefully we push to convince someone we're right, the more they instinctively resist. Imagine two people debating a political issue. Initially, the conversation is calm, with each person presenting their perspective. But as one begins pressing their point more forcefully, the other feels cornered and responds by doubling down on their stance. Before long, the discussion devolves into interruptions, raised voices, and frustration. Neither side is truly listening anymore. They are simply trying to outmaneuver each other. In the end, no one's mind is changed. Instead, both walk away even more convinced of their own correctness. This is the noisy argument paradox in action. The paradox arises from a fundamental flaw in how we approach disagreements. When we argue, especially about deeply held beliefs, we often assume the problem lies with the other person. We think, if only they saw things clearly, they would agree with me. But this assumption ignores a crucial fact. Everyone believes their own perspective is valid. No one enters an argument thinking, I'm definitely wrong, but I'll argue anyway. When both sides are certain of their correctness, pushing harder doesn't close the gap, it widens it. A significant psychological factor in this paradox is defensiveness. When people feel their beliefs are under attack, they instinctively cling to them even more tightly, a phenomenon known as the backfire effect. Rather than reconsider their stance in the face of opposing evidence, they become even more entrenched. This happens because core beliefs, especially those tied to identity, feel deeply personal. Challenging someone's worldview can feel like challenging who they are. As a result, the more aggressive an argument becomes, the more the other person feels the need to defend themselves. Instead of fostering understanding, the exchange becomes a contest of wills. Consider a simple example. Two friends debating weekend plans. One prefers hiking, while the other wants to stay home and relax. If the hiker friend passionately argues that hiking is the superior choice, it's healthy, refreshing, and good for mental well-being, the other might start to feel as though their preference is being dismissed or even criticized. Rather than being persuaded, they become defensive. Relaxing is just as good for mental health. Hiking is exhausting and stressful. The more one side pushes, the more the other resists. Soon, they are no longer discussing weekend plans, but engaging in a larger debate about lifestyle choices. Neither feels heard, and neither changes their mind. The paradox wins again. This dynamic isn't limited to personal disagreements. It plays out on a societal level as well. Public discourse, especially on politics and culture, often follows the same pattern. Opposing sides shout their points at each other, each convinced that the other is ignorant or misinformed. The more heated the debate, the more entrenched everyone becomes. Instead of striving for common ground, the focus shifts to out-arguing the opposition. This is why so many societal debates feel increasingly polarized. The more noise there is, the harder it becomes to have meaningful conversations. The paradox also exposes the role of ego in arguments. Often, the desire to win an argument isn't about improving the situation. It's about the satisfaction of being right. This ego-driven approach makes it difficult to listen or empathize. Instead of focusing on the actual issue, we focus on how the argument makes us feel, validated, superior, or attacked. This shift in focus makes resolution almost impossible. Breaking free from the noisy argument paradox requires a different approach to disagreement. What if, instead of arguing to win, we argued to understand? This doesn't mean agreeing with the other person, but it does mean genuinely listening to their perspective. When someone feels heard, they are far less likely to become defensive and possibly more open to considering another point of view. While this doesn't guarantee agreement, it does create the space for meaningful dialogue. Returning to the two friends discussing their weekend plans, imagine if the hiker friend said, "I get why you like staying home. It's relaxing and you've had a busy week." In response, the other might say, "Yeah, but I can see how hiking could be fun too." The Pinocchio Paradox is a fascinating thought experiment that blends logic, self-reference, and the nature of truth with the whimsy of a classic tale. In the original story, Pinocchio is a wooden puppet whose nose grows whenever he tells a lie. This seemingly simple rule sets the stage for a paradox when Pinocchio utters the statement, "My nose will grow now." The contradiction emerges from the fact that if his nose does grow, it means his statement was true, but his nose only grows when he lies, making the statement false. Conversely, if his nose does not grow, the statement must have been false, meaning he was lying, which should trigger his nose to grow. This creates an inescapable loop, a self-referential contradiction with no definitive resolution. At its core, this paradox belongs to the family of liar paradoxes, which challenge the binary nature of truth and falsehood. A classic example is the statement, "This sentence is false." If it is true, then it must be false. But if it is false, then it must be true. Pinocchio's version of this paradox takes the abstract logical problem and ties it to a physical consequence, his nose growing, giving it a tangible and almost playful quality. What makes this paradox particularly intriguing is its reliance on self-reference. Self-referential statements, those that comment on themselves, are often where logic breaks down. Pinocchio's statement directly influences the very condition it describes, leading to an endless feedback loop. A similar issue arises in artificial intelligence and programming, where self-referential conditions can create infinite loops that cause systems to crash. In mathematics, certain problems are classified as undecidable, meaning they cannot be resolved within their own logical framework. Beyond its logical implications, the Pinocchio paradox raises philosophical questions about identity and agency. Pinocchio is not merely a puppet. He is a character with thoughts, intentions, and the ability to predict future events. When he makes a statement about his nose, is he exerting control over the rule governing it? Or is he revealing a limitation in the rule itself? This touches on deeper philosophical debates about free will and the constraints of structured systems. Additionally, the paradox highlights the interplay between language and reality. Pinocchio's words do not just describe a potential outcome, they actively shape it. This mirrors real-world discussions in linguistics and philosophy, where language is not just a tool for communication, but a force that can influence perception and behavior. It also ties into ethical dilemmas, such as whether a lie is defined by intent or by outcome. If Pinocchio sincerely believes his nose will grow but it doesn't, was he lying or was he simply mistaken? This distinction further complicates the seemingly straightforward rule governing his nose. On a broader level, the Pinocchio paradox serves as a metaphor for the complexities of logic, truth, and paradoxical systems that resist simple resolutions. From quantum mechanics to artificial intelligence, many fields encounter situations where rigid rules lead to unexpected contradictions. The paradox's appeal lies not in solving it, but in contemplating the questions it raises. Questions that stretch our understanding of logic and challenge our assumptions about reality. Ultimately, the paradox reminds us that truth is not always as simple as it seems. Some problems cannot be resolved through straightforward reasoning, and some questions serve more to expand our thinking than to provide definitive answers. Pinocchio's story may be a fairy tale, but the paradox it inspires continues to captivate and challenge minds across disciplines, offering a timeless puzzle that defies easy explanation.